a Shanghai port. Talks between the US and China on trade have stalled since a breakdown in May. Photo: Qilai Shen, Bloomberg News by Lingling Wei and Lingling Wei. The Wall Street Journal Biography. Lingling Wei at WSJ.com. Chao Deng in Beijing and Chao Deng. The Wall Street Journal Biography at Chao_Deng. Chao.Deng at WSJ.com. Josh Zumbrun in Washington. Josh Zumbrun. The Wall Street Journal Biography at Josh Zumbrun. Josh.Zumbrun at WSJ.com. Updated Sept. 12/2019, 7:32 p.m. Eastern Time. China is looking to narrow the scope of its negotiations with the U.S. only trade matters, seeking to put thornier national security issues on a separate track in a bid to break deadlock talks with the U.S. Chinese officials hope such an approach would help both sides resolve some immediate issues and offer a path out of the impasse, people familiar with the plan said. The move is the latest in a series of steps officials in Washington and Beijing are taking to ease trade tensions ahead of high-level negotiations in October. It comes as President Trump moved on Wednesday to postpone until October 15 a tariff increase on about $250 billion in imports that had been set to hit on October 1. He called the delay a goodwill gesture as China marks the 70th anniversary of communist rule on that date. Chinese negotiators, meanwhile, are making plans to boost purchases of U.S. agricultural products, give U.S. companies greater access to China's market and bolster intellectual property protections, people familiar with the plan said. China also made public this week a series of exemptions to its tariffs on U.S. imports. While business groups welcomed the efforts, many of the nation's sharpest disagreements remain unresolved. Stocks rose on the news, but some business leaders cautioned that both sides have appeared close to reaching an accord in the past, only to have negotiations break down. The two nations remain divided on how to remove tariffs that cover the majority of trade between the two nations. China's practices with intellectual property and investment restrictions on U.S. businesses, as well as Beijing's extensive reliance on state-owned enterprises. It's a hopeful sign that they're escalating rather than escalating, said Rufus Yersha, president of the National Foreign Trade Council. Given what's happened before, I'd be cautious about assuming this means we're on a quick path to a deal. Beijing hopes to adopt a two-track approach before the planned talks between its trade team, led by Vice Premier Liu He, and the U.S. delegation, led by Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, these people said. While Mr. Liu would continue to lead talks on trade issues, a separate team would be assigned to manage the other geopolitical matters, they said. Deputy-level Chinese trade officials plan to head to Washington next week to pave the way for the high-level meeting, another person familiar with the matter said. If talks progress, there is a possibility the two sides could achieve a deal that would be far more limited than the sweeping agreement that was pursued in May, but one that could pause or even roll back U.S. tariffs to cover just $250 billion of Chinese imports, a person familiar with the efforts said. Asked about that possibility of a limited deal later Thursday, Mr. Trump said he would consider it, but I'd rather get the whole deal done. U.S. business groups support any progress toward a deal, pointing to the increasing toll tariffs will take on U.S. companies and consumers. We urge both sides to work toward eliminating tariffs, realize the concrete progress that is possible today, and build momentum for longer-term negotiations on the most challenging issues, said Craig Allen, the president of the U.S.-China Business Council. In Washington, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin said the U.S.'s top concerns remain intellectual property rights and forced joint ventures, as well as currency issues. Unrest in Hong Kong isn't under discussion as part of the trade talks, Mr. Mnuchin said, but he didn't address whether negotiators would discuss Huawei Technologies Co., which the US regards as a security threat amid a global shift to next-generation wireless networks. He also dismissed speculation that the administration would accept a watered-down deal ahead of the 2020 presidential election. Mr. Trump, a Republican, is prepared to keep these tariffs in place, the secretary said. He is prepared to raise tariffs if we need to raise tariffs. He said agricultural purchases by China would be a central piece of any deal. Mr. Trump, in a brief morning tweet, echoed those remarks. It is expected that China will be buying large amounts of our agricultural products. China has taken tentative steps in that direction. Ahead of October's talks, Beijing has been looking to lighten the mood by making more purchases of U.S. agricultural goods, which could include pork and soybeans, to show its sincerity in meeting a demand for which Mr. Trump has pressed hard throughout the trade dispute. China's retaliatory steps to Mr. Trump's tariffs have hit U.S. farmers hard, one factor that has pressured the Trump administration to find a path forward. This pressure has been exacerbated by a disagreement between the Trump administration and House Democrats over how to fund the White House's farm bailout programs. Though Beijing suspended farm purchases in August, Chinese companies have started to ask about prices for U.S. farm goods again, China's Commerce Ministry said on Thursday. Similar inquiries this summer failed to result in large-scale purchases, among the reasons negotiators have made no progress in recent months. Trade talks fell apart in May, when the U.S. accused Beijing of backtracking on pledges to enact deeper changes to its economic system. Chinese officials denied such charges and said any agreement between the two countries has to be balanced, meaning the U.S. would have to make compromises, too. While formal negotiations have since resumed, there has been little tangible progress. Beijing's attempt to separate trade from broader concerns about geopolitical competition will likely be a hard sell for the Trump administration, which has linked trade negotiations with other issues, including Huawei, which Washington has put on an export blacklist. Huawei is a leader in 5G network equipment, which U.S. officials say could allow it to spy on behalf of the Chinese government, allegations Beijing rejects. Chinese President Xi Jinping has made relief for the company a precondition for reaching a trade agreement. Chinese officials are hoping President Trump will keep his word on lifting a U.S. ban on purchases of Huawei products that aren't tied to national security. Washington and Beijing will also likely disagree on what gets categorized as a trade issue as opposed to a national security issue. In earlier rounds of discussions, Chinese officials had sought to treat data transfers and cloud computing as related to national security, while the U.S. pushed Beijing to address those issues in the negotiations over trade and investment. Related video: the trade war with China is putting a strain on the U.S. agriculture industry. WSJ's Jason Bellini Saturday down with a group of farmers from the corn, beef, soybean, and dairy industries to hear how tariffs are affecting the businesses. Hong Kong soccer fans protest the government. Photo: Qin Sheng. Associated Press. China feels that time is on its side, believing Mr. Trump is under pressure to strike a deal as part of his re-election bid next year. Even so, officials in Beijing are eager to come to an agreement, however narrow, with the U.S. to de-escalate tensions and alleviate some of the pressures on its economy. China's Vice Premier Liu He speaks with President Trump during a meeting in the Oval Office in April. Photo: Jim Watson, Agence France Presse. Getty Images. Mr. Liu, the Chinese Vice Premier, has previously said 40% of the U.S. demands could be tackled immediately, while another 40% could be addressed through continued negotiations, according to people tracking the talks. The remainder would be off limits for negotiation. In a sign that Beijing is becoming more eager to move forward with talks, China has played up the need for the two countries to work together through its state media. The tone has changed, said Huo Jianguo, the former head of a trade policy body under China's Commerce Ministry. The Chinese side is putting out a signal of urgency. This week, Mr. Liu and Chinese Premier Li Keqiang each sent positive signals to U.S. executives during separate meetings in Beijing with Citigroup Inc. Chief Executive Michael Corbat and with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Head of International Affairs, Myron Brilliant. If the two sides aren't able to translate the bonhomie into tangible progress, the stage is set for more tariff escalation. In addition to the U.S. Li increase is postponed until the middle of next month. Another round of U.S. tariffs is scheduled to be implemented on December 15, covering consumer goods including smartphones, toys and apparel. Lin Zhou in Beijing and William Malden and Vivian Salama in Washington contributed to this article. Related coverage: American businesses say China's slowdown is a greater threat than the trade war. September 11, China's trade numbers send more distress signals. Sept. 8–10% tariffs were manageable. At 25%, businesses are squirming. August 12, write to Lingling Wei at lingling.wei@wsj.com. Chow Deng at Chow Deng at wsj.com and Josh Zumbran at Josh Zumbran at wsj.com. Copyright 2019 Dow Jones. All rights reserved. 87,990 CBE 8566818 D5 ADAC 44 C7 B1 CDEB 8. Let's block ads. Why?